This is my HP Z600 workstation that's been a home server now for about a year. Well, it's time to replace it with something purpose-built. This machine has been chugging along now for a while. It actually is incredibly impressive considering it's about 15 years old. It still does everything I'd need it to do, really. It works well as a media server, it works well as a backup server, and it even runs quite well as a Minecraft server from time to time. My main issues with it is it's loud, it's really loud, and also it uses a lot of power. It uses about 150 watts just idle, not actually doing anything. Which when you have a server running 24/7, that's quite a lot. It adds up. It costs about £30 a month to run this thing. It's too much, way too much. So we're going to replace it with some new hardware. But yeah, it'll be a shame to see it go, but still, it's time to go. This thing also only really has drive bays for 2 hard drives, which as a home server NAS setup, I need more space than that. So let's get a few bits out of this, and then let's have a look at the new hardware. So this is the HP Z600 opened up, and it's quite a clean, cool machine in here. There's lots of I/O, lots of expansion. It's just not enough space for it all, really, in terms of actually places to put disk drives. There's only 2 drives here that actually have caddies, and then you can see I've just kind of put 2 hard drives in where there would be a disk drive, and I think there was a blank spacer here as well. So not really very good for those drives. They were literally just sitting on top of each other. Not very healthy for the longevity of them. Glad that they'll get some proper mounting very soon. And then I also want to get out the M.2 drive, which is the OS drive. Again, it had this kind of PCIe riser. It works well, but you just can't boot from it, so the boot partition had to be on a spinning drive. We will be reusing the graphics card here. This is a GTX 1650, and it does a decent job at 4K transcoding, which is pretty much its primary purpose in this server. It kind of spends most of its life doing very little, but it's there for video transcoding and that sort of thing. And it does a good job at it. So that's kind of everything that we will be keeping from this machine. So I got all the new hardware together for about £400, which I think is quite a deal. At the core of this, we have a Ryzen 5 5600, which is quite a nice middle of the road processor, 6 cores, 12 threads. The dual Xeons in the old server have 4 cores each, so we're losing a few cores, but the single core performance of this is way, way higher. We will do some benchmarking later on to show that, but nonetheless, this is kind of the core, a little bit older, but it's at a really good price point at the moment. To go with that, we have 32 gigs of RAM. The old machine had 24 gigs of DDR3. This is 32 gigs of DDR4. So that would be a really nice upgrade. Again, just budget RAM. I think these modules cost about £12 each, so really good value. For the OS install, I'm going for a Crucial SSD M.2 drive, 500 gig. I believe this has the old machine has 250 gig SSD in it at the moment. The only downside to that is you can't actually boot from it. So I have a boot partition on an old hard drive, and then the OS itself is installed on the M.2 drive, which has got a PCI adapter. Anyway, this is going to be a lot better. I've then got a PCI SATA connector, so I can get more SATA hard drives into this machine. Again, I want to be able to restore lots of them. So got this, it's just generic, £20, works well. Gone for an MSI motherboard. Again, kind of middle of the road, nothing particularly amazing, but it has 2 M.2 slots. It has a full 16 lane PCI slot for graphics card, and it has a 1 lane slot as well for the SATA adapter. So yeah, again, perfect for what I need. Simple, cool master, power supply. It's not modular, but again, this isn't about looks. No one's going to see inside it, so this is fine. And again, not something I would cheap out on. You get a good, proper brand for this, and it is a bronze-rated power supply, so it shouldn't be too bad energy efficient-wise. To put it all in, I have gone for the Node 804 case. This thing is very, very cool. We'll have a closer look at it in a second. But basically, yes, it is a very old case now. It's over 10 years old, but it has 10 3.5-inch drive bays, two 2.5-inch drive bays, so much space for everything you need. In terms of actually volume, I think it's actually smaller than the old case. And yeah, great airflow, everything I could want from a case for this server. So yeah, let's take a look around the case. Again, this isn't sponsored by anyone. This is all just me. I'm pretty sure Fractal Design would not want me talking about their 10-plus-year-old case if that was the case. So anyway, let's take a little bit of a closer look. So first things first, as with any Fractal Design case, we get a really good user guide. Also, we get this red piece of paper, which gives you information on what to do if you have a faulty product. The user guide itself, again, as always, these things are really, really well laid out. It gives you all the statistics and specifications that you could need, all the different parts that it comes with, a look at the different kind of configurations that you can have with this build. Very much kind of designed to either be set up as a smallish form factor gaming PC with lots of space for water cooling, or as a storage server build, which is what we're doing here. And then straight into a very good step-by-step guide on how to get this set up. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's get the panels off of the case. And of course, we need to get that plastic removed. So inside the case, cable tied into the middle is a small box, and this kind of is all the accessories that come with the case. So all your screws, some mounting brackets, all sorts of bits and pieces that you're going to need for the different configurations that it supports, which is great to see. Again, you always get everything you could possibly need with these kits. They really do think of everything as far as I'm concerned. Cable ties, the whole lot. It's great. And then turning the case round to the side with where the motherboard would be, we do have a fan controller here. It's kind of a basic 3-speed fan controller. I won't be using this because my motherboard actually has 3 fan headers, and this case has 3 fans in it. So that is exactly what we'll go with and let the BIOS handle the fan speeds. You've also got all your other cables for the front I/O, USB 3, and the front fan here as well. So first up, as guided by the user guide, let's get the power supply in place. Like I said, it's not modular, but we have plenty of space in this case to kind of just stuff the cables away. One interesting point here is that the power supply can actually be mounted either orientation. It can either be mounted as I have it, which is like upside down as far as the writing is concerned, or the correct way up. So you can either have the fan pulling air from the bottom underneath the case in through the power supply, or you can have it pulling air from the main cavity with the hard drives and everything, which is kind of useful depending on your fan setup. With the power supply now in place, it's time to get the motherboard prepared and get all of that set up. So here we have our motherboard all pristine, including the warning sticker about the battery. Don't eat the battery. Probably don't let children near motherboards anyway, at least not unsupervised. Anyway, this is the board we're going with. We have the 4 DDR4 slots. We have 2 PCIe 1 lane slots, which I actually thought was only 1. So that's a nice added bonus. And we have our full 16 slot as well for the graphics card. And yeah, really, considering this board is just a M-ATX board, there's quite a lot crammed on here. 2 M.2 slots as well, one having a heatsink, the other just being exposed. So yeah, all in all, pretty happy with this. So first things first, let's get our CPU installed. Pretty simple. Just lift the handle, line it up with the correct pins. There's a little arrow in the corner that shows you where it needs to go. Drop it in, push down the lever, and there you go, installed. And then next we need to remove the kind of bracket that's currently pre-installed on the motherboard so we can fit our heatsink. Lots of lovely thermal paste later. You can never have too much thermal paste. Actually, you probably can, but this is fine. Get the basic AMD supplied heatsink installed. Of course, the eagle-eyed of you may notice that I've installed this the wrong way round. And actually, the AMD logo on the edge of the fan is going to block one of our RAM slots. I will be switching this round, so let's go ahead and reinstall that the correct way round. With that now actually installed the correct way round and not blocking anything, we can pop in our 4 RAM cards. Next up, the M.2 drive. So this top M.2 slot is PCIe 4 and does come with a heatsink, so we might as well use it. Why not? And these absolutely tiny screws. So let's get this off, and then we can install our heatsink and then on top of our M.2 card. We're now going to install the appropriate spacers on the case to support the AMD motherboard. Pretty straightforward. Again, all described in the very handy user guide. They also have these cool little like cover for the mount, if you like, that you can then actually use a screwdriver to screw the mount into, which works really well and means that you can make sure that those mounts are tightly screwed into place instead of having to kind of try and do it with your hands. And with the risers in place, we can pop the motherboard in. I really like black PCBs. I just think they look very clean. This works very well. Okay, on to the next steps, which according to the user guide is installing the graphics card and then getting the hard drives installed. Let's get our graphics card installed and also our PCI SATA adapter as well. And then with all that in place, let's turn it around and get these hard drive bays out. Each of these supports 4 hard drives, and then you can mount a further 2 hard drives around the other side at the bottom of the case. So from our use, I have 6 drives that I'm going to install. So this back here is more than enough space. And there we go, that's everything installed. Quite a dense amount of storage and weight here, that's for sure. But it looks good. Round the other side as well, also looking good. Bit of cable management, nothing super amazing, but it's clean enough. It's not going to block any airflow. Alright, there we go. Let's get this thing booted up and see what my impressions are. It's a few days later, and I now have everything set up and working on the server. It's humming away nicely. And yeah, overall impression straight off the bat, I'm very impressed with the case. Very impressed with the hardware as well. But a few things to note that have happened from when I finished recording building it to now. The first issue I had is it wouldn't turn on, which is always such a great place to be with a new built computer. And after about, I'd say 15-20 minutes of head scratching, testing different things, I realized I'd plugged the front I/O power button and all those cables into the wrong headers. So I'm kind of glad that nothing exploded. I'm sure it wouldn't have, but at least it didn't. And switching over to the correct headers, lo and behold, pressing the power button then actually worked. So that's a good start. but it did work. So I then got Ubuntu Server Edition installed on the M.2 drive and got all that set up, no problem at all. I'd unplugged all of the spinning drives during this because I didn't want there to be any chance of me touching the data that was already on those drives. And then I went about plugging them all in, getting them all mounted in Ubuntu as I wanted. However, I did hit a problem, and it was quite an interesting one. Both my 10 terabyte and 12 terabyte drives wouldn't spin up and wouldn't mount and wouldn't be recognized by the system, which was a bit worrying because these were my largest drives and kind of my most expensive drives, and they were working perfectly fine in the old Z600. Well, it turns out that there is actually a feature built into some hard drives that allows the operating system to reboot the drives without having to disconnect power from them. It seems like this feature might be an enterprise feature because essentially what the issue was, my power supply didn't support that feature. So the result is it was just permanently stuck in power off mode. It wouldn't start up, while it worked fine in the much older Z600. But that is an enterprise machine, and these drives are enterprise drives. My smaller 2 terabyte hard drives worked perfectly fine. So it definitely leads me to believe that this is a feature that only really exists in the enterprise space. But unfortunately, if your power supply doesn't support it, the drive just won't turn on at all. So the fix for this was that I had to actually get a Molex 4-pin 2SATA adapter, and that worked perfectly fine. Still not 100% sure why, but if you Google something along the lines of my 10 terabyte drive won't turn on, you'll find a lot of people have experienced this issue, and the general consensus is if your power supply doesn't support it, just get a Molex adapter because that seems to bypass it completely. So at least that was an easy enough fix and a quick purchase on Amazon, and a day later we're all up and running. So onto some benchmarking, and again I just used GeekBench to benchmark the two CPUs. Nothing particularly strenuous, nothing particularly massive in terms of benchmarking. I just wanted to make sure that this computer had enough performance that it was at least going to match the old machine. I was sure it was going to, like comparing spec for spec, it should, but I just wanted to check and make sure that it would. And I was very pleasantly surprised by the results. Under the Z600, the Xeon processors in there, so both of them have 4 cores, so a total of 8 cores. We had a single core score of 462 and a multi-core score of 2,427, which is fine, and I knew that was actually plenty of power for what I do. I had no performance issues with my old machine. The main physical issues were power consumption and the fitting of the actual drives that I wanted to be able to have in the machine. So I ran GeekBench on the new machine, and yeah, we got a much better score. We got a single core performance of 2088. So yeah, it actually almost has as good a single core as the old machine's multi-core has, which is kind of impressive. And then a multi-core score of 9,243. So blew the old machine out of water in terms of performance, which is great because it just gives me more overhead to run more things on there if I ever want to. The other important thing to me was power consumption. As I mentioned, the old machine was using about 150 watts at just idle, and that was equating to about £30 a month cost to run this machine. And we were getting into territories where actually I could get a cloud server for £30 a month, and it'd probably be more performant. It'd probably have less hard drive space, but it would be more performant. So nonetheless, that needed to change. And with the new machine, it will sit at around 100 watts kind of at idle. There are things running on it. There is software available, all the kind of background processes and everything. It's working. So yeah, that's good. And actually overall, I would say we are getting about a third less power consumed across like a normal day's usage compared to the old machine. So all in all, yeah, easily saving about £10 a month, bringing it down to about £20 a month, which is, in my mind, slightly more reasonable. Sure, you know, over the course of 3 and a bit years, I would actually save all the money that I spent on this, but that's not really why I was doing it anyway. Just generally, it's better in that regard. It's also a lot quieter. I have been able to kind of configure in the BIOS some nice fan curves for all 3 fans to make sure that all the hard drives stay well cooled, and so does the CPU and everything else. So I'm really happy with that. It took a bit of tweaking to get it right, but now we have basically a system that, for the most part, is very quiet, but is still keeping everything at a reasonable temperature. Whereas the old system, there just wasn't really that option, and it didn't really have fan support in Linux anyway. So all in all, you were kind of just left with the defaults, which wasn't great. So then in terms of value for money, this is really the best way to go in my book if you want to build a small home server, particularly this case if you want something that has a lot of drive space, if you really are going to be going down the backup media route and you need to be able to store terabytes of data. This really helps. It gives you a lot of space. It means you can have more of the smaller sort of 2, 3, 4 terabyte drives, which are kind of at a best price point per gigabyte compared to bigger drives, which are still quite expensive. So that works really well. And definitely if you try to find a 10 bay NAS or even like an 8 bay NAS, you're going to be paying more than what we spent on this machine. And sure, that, you know, you've got the addition of the GPU and the bits that we didn't have to buy, but you wouldn't have that in a NAS anyway. You would still have to buy those. So overall, I think the value here is definitely can be seen compared to custom built hardware. And things like Ubuntu server, and there's lots of other operating systems available that are open source and great to work with if you're building like a home server and you want to get into things like Docker and stuff. Onto the case itself. Well, like all Fractal design cases that I've come across, it's yet again an incredibly well-built case. It's a bit more simplistic, maybe, not as nicely well designed in terms of like aesthetics, but it is well designed internally, well thought out. There is a lot of flexibility, a lot of options for different cooling setups, lots of options for different drive setups. You really do have a lot of space in here to work with, so I can't fault it in the slightest. The one thing I guess you could fault is the fact that this is a 10-plus-year-old case at this point, so it really is missing some of that I/O that you would start to expect in 2025. Things like USB-C don't exist, which is a shame. So, you know, it would be kind of cool to see Fractal come out with a refresh of this case. It's definitely still the best available case for this kind of setup. If you want to build something that has a lot of drives in it, you've either got to go for like a full height, full size tower case, which is going to be very expensive, or you're going to have to go with this case, essentially. This only cost me £100, which I think is an incredibly good price considering the build quality and just the sheer amount of drives and storage that you can fit in this machine is kind of crazy. Another downside I will mention, which is something I've seen now in all the Fractal cases I use, their install guides and user guides are super good, really detailed, takes you through each step, shows you all the options, but they seem to always miss out the step of, and now install your cables. So you're kind of going through, putting everything in, expecting there to be that step, and then it doesn't happen. And you might have to actually wind back a bit to plug stuff in, and you know, you have to use your brain a little bit, which is fine because most times you don't even get a nice user guide. But I think you get into this situation where you're following the user guide and that's all you're doing. And then you realize, oh, actually, yeah, I need to plug stuff in. A little bit of a nitpick, but nonetheless, a really amazing case. Absolutely love it. 100% recommend it. Before we wrap this up, I've installed quite a lot of different bits of software onto this server, mainly because I now can. I have the space, I have the power. So I just question for you, if you would be interested in some kind of reviews and guides on these kinds of bits of software that I run on my home server. Would that be interesting to you? I don't know. Comment down below and let me know. But otherwise, we are going to wrap it up for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I've certainly enjoyed putting it together, both in terms of building the thing and also putting the video together. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please, if you have enjoyed the video, do make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And I'll see you again very, very soon for another video. Bye for now.